Today we're heading to San Antonio, Texas, where the unexpected death of a cherished local baker has left the community in shock. As the investigation progressed, a tangled story of lies, betrayal, and a startling affair came to light, one that's truly hard to fathom. Rebecca "Becky" Fredrickson was a 31-year-old woman from San Antonio, Texas, well-loved for her friendly nature and exceptional baking skills. She owned Sweet Treats, a beloved local bakery that had become a cornerstone of the community. Her shop was renowned for its mouth-watering pastries, particularly her signature chocolate chip cookies and the ever-popular pumpkin spice muffins, a hit among millennials. Becky had built a loyal following, with many customers frequenting her bakery since its doors first opened. She was married to Michael Fredrickson, a 35-year-old financial advisor. They had been married for 5 years after meeting at a mutual friend's wedding, and to anyone looking in, their life appeared ideal. They lived in a charming one-story house, close to the bakery, and were well respected in the neighborhood. Becky frequently contributed cakes and other treats to local schools and community events, such as the annual San Antonio Christmas Parade. However, in the months before her death, Becky began to feel increasingly uneasy. Becky couldn't help but notice how distant Michael had become. He started coming home late from work, and his interest in their marriage seemed to fade, especially after she was diagnosed with endometriosis, a condition that made it hard for her to conceive. Starting a family had always been Becky's dream, but despite these setbacks, she held on to hope. She channeled her energy into her work, often staying late at the bakery to refine her recipes. In September 2019, Becky was gearing up for the hectic holiday season. She had just started planning the bakery's popular Halloween-themed treats, a customer favorite every year. However, despite her dedication to her business, Becky couldn't ignore the nagging sense that something was off in her personal life. Becky attempted to talk to Michael about her concerns, but he always dismissed them, leaving her to wonder what was really happening. Those who knew Becky, friends and customers alike, described her as sweet, generous, and hardworking. She was the type of person who would go out of her way to help others, and her warm smile brightened the day of everyone she encountered. Her passing would create a significant void in the community. On September 15, 2019, around 7:30 a.m., Rebecca "Becky" Fredrickson's lifeless body was found in the kitchen of her San Antonio home. The city was beginning to stir on that warm Sunday morning. Becky's neighbor, Karen Simmons, a 56-year-old schoolteacher, discovered her. Karen had observed that Becky's bakery, Sweet Treats, hadn't opened on time that morning, which was unusual. Becky's bakery was usually busy with customers eager for her famous cookies and cakes. Worried, Karen decided to check on Becky. She walked the short distance to Becky's home, located just around the corner from the bakery. Upon arrival, Karen noticed the front door was slightly ajar, which immediately raised her concerns. Becky was known for being meticulous about locking up, especially after several break-ins had occurred in the neighborhood earlier that year. Karen hesitated for a moment, but then pushed the door open and called out Becky's name. There was no response. Karen stepped inside and was met with an unsettling silence. The house was otherwise neat and tidy, except for the kitchen. As Karen entered the kitchen, her heart sank. Becky was lying on the floor in a pool of blood. The rolling pin, which Becky always kept on the counter, lay beside her, also stained with blood. The scene was horrifying. The once warm and welcoming kitchen, where Becky had baked countless treats, had become a crime scene. In shock, Karen managed to call 911. Her hands shook as she provided the dispatcher with the address and detailed what she had discovered. Karen stayed on the line until the police arrived, struggling to hold back tears. Later, she told investigators that Becky's injuries were so severe that she could barely recognize her. When the police arrived, they found Karen outside, visibly shaken and in tears. She could barely speak, and the officers had to guide her to a nearby bench to sit down. News of Becky's death spread quickly through the neighborhood, leaving everyone in disbelief. How could someone so kind and gentle meet such a violent end? When the San Antonio Police Department received the 911 call on September 15, 2019, officers arrived at the scene within minutes. Sergeant Maria Diaz, a 42-year-old veteran known for her thoroughness and compassion, and Officer James O'Meal, a 28-year-old with just 3 years on the force and a strong desire to learn, were among the first to respond. They quickly secured the area, putting up yellow crime scene tape around Becky Fredrickson's small, single-story home. The peaceful neighborhood, usually filled with the aroma of fresh pastries from Becky's bakery, was now disrupted by the flashing lights of police cars and the sound of emergency radios. As the officers entered the house, they were struck by the unsettling silence. The living room was pristine, with cozy furniture and framed wedding photos of Becky on the walls. However, as they moved towards the kitchen, the scene shifted dramatically. The kitchen, once a place of warmth and comfort, had turned into a disturbing crime scene. Becky's body lay in the center of the room, with blood staining the white tiled floor. Nearby, the rolling pin symbolic of her passion for baking was covered in blood. Dr. Diaz quickly assessed the situation, drawing on her experience. The scene suggested a violent struggle. Chairs were overturned, and a mixing bowl had crashed to the floor, its contents spilled. Becky's apron was stained with blood, and her hands had defensive wounds, indicating she had fought fiercely for her life. Officer O'Neill documented the scene with photographs while Dr. Diaz took meticulous notes. The forensic team arrived shortly after, led by experts who collected fingerprints, blood samples, and other evidence to help reconstruct the events. The medical examiner, Dr. Lillian Pang, a no-nonsense 55-year-old with decades of experience, arrived to inspect the body. She observed that Becky had sustained multiple blunt force injuries and estimated the time of death to be between 10 p.m. and midnight the previous evening. The severity of the attack shocked everyone present, including the seasoned investigators. Outside, news of Becky's death spread rapidly. Neighbors gathered, whispering in shock. Many of them had known Becky personally and had been buying her baked goods for years. The sight of police cars and the grim news from inside the house left the community in shock and mourning. As the investigation progressed, the police concentrated on collecting every piece of evidence available. They understood that the crime scene was crucial to solving this brutal murder. They needed to uncover who could have committed such a heinous act against a cherished member of the community. The investigation into Becky Fredrickson's murder soon focused on her husband, Michael Fredrickson. At 35, Michael was a prominent financial advisor in San Antonio. To his clients, Michael was the epitome of professionalism, calm, reliable, and trustworthy. He had a solid reputation in the community and was frequently seen at networking events and charity functions. However, behind closed doors, Michael was not the ideal husband many might have imagined. He was quite different, in private, angry, and possessing a constant sexual appetite that his wife could never satisfy. Michael harbored many secrets and was deeply unhappy with both his life and marriage. In the days after Becky's death, investigators delved into Michael's personal life and discovered that the Fredricksons' marriage had been troubled for some time. Becky's diagnosis of endometriosis had not only crushed her dream of starting a family, but had also put significant strain on their intimate relationship. Michael, who had once been attentive and loving, became distant and frustrated. He started spending more time at work, coming home late at night or sometimes disappearing for days. Colleagues noticed his stress, but Michael dismissed their concerns, attributing them to personal issues. The real shock emerged when the police discovered Michael's affair with Becky's mother, Margaret Ruth Breedlove. At 48, Ruth, who had recently re-entered Becky's life, still exuded a charismatic charm that her daughter couldn't match. What began as a casual flirtation soon developed into a much more serious relationship. Michael and Ruth had been secretly involved, even having intimate encounters on Becky's bed when she wasn't home. This revelation shocked the investigation, revealing a man entangled in a complex web of deceit involving both a troubled mother-daughter relationship and his own actions. During his interrogation, Michael initially denied any involvement in Becky's murder. Michael claimed he had been at the office late, working on a client's portfolio, and returned home to find Becky already dead. However, as detectives questioned him about his affair with Ruth, his calm demeanor started to falter. He became defensive, vehemently insisting that the affair had no connection to Becky's death. When detectives presented evidence of his infidelity, including explicit text messages and naked photos exchanged with Ruth, Michael's composure broke down. His behavior grew increasingly suspicious, his responses were evasive, and he had difficulty providing a clear timeline for the night of the murder. Investigators also found it strange that Michael displayed minimal emotion when discussing Becky's death, often referring to her in a detached manner, as if she were just another news story. Despite his efforts to distance himself from the crime, Michael's affair with Ruth offered a compelling motive for the murder. The pressure on Michael was intensifying, and detectives were resolute in uncovering the truth. As the investigation into Becky Fredrickson's murder progressed, the police shifted their focus to Margaret Ruth Breedlove, Becky's 48-year-old mother. Ruth had a complex history that raised several red flags for detectives. She had re-entered Becky's life only a few years earlier after living a turbulent and often reckless lifestyle for decades. Having moved from Oakland, California, to San Antonio to reconnect with her daughter, Ruth's return had instead brought more turmoil than reconciliation. Ruth was a striking woman who thrived on being the center of attention. Even in her late 40s, she retained a youthful appearance and a magnetic personality that attracted people. After having Becky at just 17 and leaving her in the care of her own mother, Ruth spent years drifting from one job to another and from one relationship to the next. Ruth had worked as a house painter in Oakland, where her bold fashion choices and vibrant personality made her stand out. Her life took a dramatic turn in the late 1990s when she joined a cult called the Sunshine Family, leading her to lose contact with Becky for nearly 20 years. When Ruth reappeared in Becky's life, it was evident that she had not changed much. Ruth remained the same flirtatious, attention-seeking woman she had always been, quickly becoming a disruptive force in Becky's marriage. She openly flirted with Michael and even made out with him in front of her daughter. This behavior further strained the already fragile relationship between mother and daughter. During her interrogation, Ruth openly discussed her affair with Michael, describing their sexual encounters as marvelous. She portrayed their relationship as a passionate, all-consuming affair that provided her with a renewed sense of purpose. Ruth justified her actions by claiming that Michael was sexually unfulfilled in his marriage, and she believed she was simply offering him the excitement and satisfaction he desired. For Ruth, the affair was more than a fling. It was a profound, soul-to-soul connection that she believed was destined. However, she denied any involvement in Becky's murder, asserting that she had been at home that night, watching Real Housewives and sipping a glass of red wine. During the interrogation, Ruth's tone was defiant, as if she felt her actions were justified. Detectives observed that she showed little remorse for the affair and seemed more worried about how the revelation would impact her than about her daughter's death. Her lack of empathy, combined with the affair, made her a strong suspect, but there was no direct evidence linking her to the crime. Despite her claims of innocence, investigators remained skeptical and continued to closely examine Ruth's every move. In the investigation into Becky Fredrickson's murder, police also began focusing on a third suspect, Danny La Calibra Hernandez Basco. At 22, Danny was known for his notorious reputation in San Antonio. Originally from Tamaulipas, Mexico, Danny had a long criminal record that included theft, assault, and drug-related charges. His nickname, La Calibra, meaning the snake in English, reflected his slippery and dangerous nature. Danny was known for his rough and intimidating presence in the community. Danny had been seen near Becky's bakery multiple times in the weeks before her murder, sparking rumors of his involvement in local criminal activity. Witnesses reported seeing him lurking around the neighborhood, often dressed in dark clothing and staying in the shadows. He was the type of person who made people uneasy, with a constant edge of violence about him. When police brought Danny in for questioning, they anticipated a challenging interrogation. However, Danny surprised them by steadfastly maintaining his innocence. He insisted he had no involvement in Becky's murder, and that he had merely been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Danny explained that he had been in the area to meet old friends who had recently immigrated to the United States, not to cause any trouble. He insisted he had never met Becky and had no reason to harm her. Throughout the interrogation, Danny remained defensive. Danny was angry and frustrated, lashing out at the detectives during questioning. He accused them of targeting him due to his criminal past and Mexican nationality, labeling the investigation a witch hunt. Despite his protests, the police continued to view him with suspicion. Danny's violent history and proximity to the crime scene made him a person of interest. However, as the interrogation progressed, it became apparent that there was little evidence linking him directly to Becky's murder. There were no witnesses who could place him at the scene during the crime, and no physical evidence connected him to the murder. Although Danny's presence in the area was suspicious, it wasn't sufficient to charge him. He was eventually released, but police continued to monitor him closely, knowing that his volatile nature and criminal background made him a potential threat. As the investigation into Becky Fredrickson's murder continued without a clear suspect, frustration began to mount for the detectives. On the morning of September 18, 2019, a breakthrough emerged when Margaret Ruth Breedlove made a startling revelation that shifted the course of the case. During a follow-up interview, Ruth disclosed that she was pregnant and that the father was her own son-in-law, Michael. This revelation stunned the police, adding a new layer of complexity to an already tangled web of relationships. Detectives realized that this new information could be crucial in uncovering the motive behind Becky's murder. The news of Ruth's pregnancy was a bombshell, indicating that the affair between her and Michael was far more serious than initially thought. With this new information, the police intensified their investigation, recognizing it as a critical lead in unraveling the motive behind Becky's brutal murder. They decided to re-examine the crime scene and the previously collected evidence, hoping to uncover any overlooked details. On September 20, 2019, 2 days after Ruth's confession, detectives revisited Becky's house. The crime scene remained eerily untouched, a stark reminder of the brutal event that had occurred. Recognizing his volatile nature and criminal background as a potential threat, the police kept a close watch on him. As the investigation into Becky Fredrickson's murder continued without identifying a clear suspect, frustration began to grow among the detectives. But on the morning of September 18, 2019, the case took a dramatic turn when Margaret Ruth Breedlove made a shocking revelation. During a follow-up interview with detectives, Ruth disclosed information that would change the direction of the investigation entirely. She revealed that she was pregnant, and the father was none other than her own son-in-law, Michael Fredrickson. This revelation left the police in shock, adding a new layer of complexity to an already tangled case, and to an already tangled web of relationships. Detectives realized that this revelation might be the key to uncovering the motive behind Becky's brutal murder. The news of Ruth's pregnancy was a bombshell, suggesting that the affair between Ruth and Michael was more than just a fling. It was something far more serious. Armed with this new information, the police intensified their investigation. They decided to re-examine the crime scene and the evidence gathered earlier, hoping to find any overlooked details. On September 20, 2019, just 2 days after Ruth's confession, detectives returned to Becky's house, the site of the murder. Inside, the crime scene remained eerily preserved, a haunting reminder of the violence that had taken place. The detectives meticulously searched the area, paying particular attention to the rolling pin that had been used as the murder weapon. Forensic experts re-examined the rolling pin, this time searching for any DNA or fingerprints that might have been overlooked initially. At the same time, detectives intensified their scrutiny of Michael Fredrickson. Armed with the knowledge of Ruth's pregnancy, detectives began to piece together a timeline of events leading up to Becky's murder. They discovered that Michael had been increasingly anxious in the weeks prior to the crime. He had reportedly distanced himself from both his wife and Ruth and made several unusual mistakes at work, which co-workers attributed to his distracted state of mind. Detectives wondered if Michael had known about Ruth's pregnancy and whether it had contributed to his growing anxiety. Detectives wondered if Becky might have known about this shocking secret. The breakthrough came when they discovered a series of deleted text messages on Michael's phone, which digital forensic experts were able to recover. The recovered messages revealed a heated argument between Michael and Becky on the night of her death. Becky confronted Michael about his affair with Ruth, using a binky emoji, and Michael, in a panic, admitted to the relationship. The argument escalated quickly, and Michael's final message suggested he intended to, quote, "F you to death with this new evidence." The police had the crucial link needed to connect Michael directly to the murder. The text messages provided a clear motive: Michael had killed Becky in a desperate attempt to escape the consequences of his affair and Ruth's pregnancy. On the evening of September 21, 2019, after uncovering these incriminating texts and learning about Ruth's pregnancy, the police were confident they had enough evidence to arrest Michael Fredrickson. Michael, 35, was a successful financial advisor in San Antonio, known for his calm and collected demeanor. However, beneath this facade, he was burdened by his own secrets and desires. His affair with his mother-in-law, Ruth, and the news that she was pregnant with his child had pushed him to his breaking point. Detectives decided to confront Michael at his home, a modest residence in a quiet San Antonio neighborhood, arriving just after 8 p.m., knowing Michael would likely be home. The air was thick with tension as they knocked on the door. When Michael answered, the TV was playing how-to videos about child rearing. He looked tired and on edge, a sharp contrast to his usual composed demeanor. The lead detective informed Michael that they needed to discuss new developments in the case. Michael hesitated but allowed them inside. The detectives wasted no time. As the detectives presented the evidence, including the recovered text messages and Ruth's pregnancy, Michael's composed exterior started to falter. He initially attempted to downplay the situation, insisting that the texts were misunderstood and that he and Becky had merely had a typical marital argument. However, the moment Detective Dias brought up Ruth's pregnancy, something shifted in Michael's demeanor. The mention of Ruth's pregnancy test, which she had cruelly flaunted in front of Becky, seemed to be the final blow. Michael's face turned pale, and he began to pace the room, his agitation growing with each step. He refused to meet the detective's eyes as the weight of the situation pressed down on him. Realizing he was trapped, Michael's composure crumbled, and he confessed. He admitted to the affair, describing how Becky's confrontation that night had pushed him over the edge. When Ruth had taunted Becky with the positive pregnancy test, it triggered an argument that quickly spiraled out of control. Overwhelmed with fear and guilt, Michael panicked and, in a moment of rage, lashed out in the most horrific way possible. He recounted how, in a moment of blind fury, he had grabbed the rolling pin from the counter and brutally attacked Becky. His twisted logic led him to believe that by getting rid of Becky, he could escape the turmoil and start over with Ruth and their unborn child. But now, faced with the gravity of his actions, he seemed almost resigned to his fate. The detectives arrested Michael on the spot, reading him his rights as they placed him in handcuffs. He offered no resistance, his once calm and collected facade Michael hung his head in defeat as the police escorted him out of the house. Neighbors stood on their porches, stunned to see the familiar face of someone they thought they knew, now accused of such a horrific crime. The Fredrickson family was heartbroken, struggling to make sense of how the man they once loved and trusted could commit such a terrible act. For them, the arrest was just the start of a long, painful path towards seeking justice. Michael Fredrickson's trial began on December 30th, 2019, at the Bexar County Courthouse in San Antonio. The case quickly grabbed the attention of local news outlets like KSA-12 and the San Antonio Express News. Reporters flocked to the courthouse, eager to capture every twist and turn of this disturbing case involving a well-known financial advisor, his wife, and her mother. The prosecution was spearheaded by Assistant District Attorney Lisa Perez Brito, a determined and straightforward prosecutor who was prepared to bring justice to the Fredrickson family. Assistant District Attorney Lisa Perez Brito, known for her thorough courtroom approach, portrayed Michael as a man pushed to murder by the stress of his affair with Ruth Breedlove and her unexpected pregnancy. She argued that Michael, unable to handle the fallout of his actions, killed Becky in a desperate bid to flee from his failing life. The prosecution's case focused on the text messages found on Michael's phone and Ruth's pregnancy. The prosecution's case also relied on Michael's confession to the police. In contrast, defense attorney Mark Caldwell aimed to show Michael as someone in deep emotional turmoil. Caldwell, known for his persuasive and sympathetic courtroom style, argued that Michael never meant to kill Becky. He suggested that the crime was a tragic accident, resulting from an argument that got out of hand. Was found guilty of the murder of Becky Fredrickson. The verdict was delivered after just 6 hours of jury deliberation following a week of intense testimony. Becky's family, deeply affected by the proceedings, faced the outcome with a mix of relief and sorrow. The trial marked the end of a harrowing chapter for them and the beginning of a new, difficult path toward healing and closure. Things can unravel beneath the surface of a seemingly normal life. The brutal murder of Becky Fredrickson and the subsequent trial of her husband, Michael, revealed the dark secrets and profound strain hidden within their family. While the sentence provided a measure of justice, the impact of the crime resonated deeply throughout the community, underscoring the fragility of human relationships and the devastating consequences of deceit and betrayal. The facade of a seemingly perfect life can collapse suddenly. In the wake of the trial, the lives of all those involved shifted profoundly. Michael Fredrickson began his life sentence at the Texas Department of Criminal Justice's William P. Hobby Unit, a far cry from the comfortable existence he once enjoyed. With ample time to reflect on the choices that led him here, Michael faced a harsh reality far removed from his previous life. Michael Fredrickson's reputation in San Antonio was shattered, leaving him as a symbol of betrayal and deceit. Ruth Breedlove, devastated by the trial's revelations, faced community ostracism. The affair with Michael, once a hidden passion, was now known to all. Seeking a fresh start away from the scandal, Ruth left San Antonio for a new city where she hoped to escape her past. The emotional weight of the trial and her daughter's death took a heavy toll on Ruth. The pregnancy, once a beacon of hope, became a painful reminder of the chaos she had contributed to. Believing that adoption was the best option for the child's future, Ruth decided to give the baby up. Over time, Becky Fredrickson's murder became a somber part of San Antonio's history, but for those who loved her, the loss remained a deep and lasting wound.